Welcome learners. Today we are going to see about the group performance and group decision making. Groups are created to accomplish the important task which is needed to be performed quickly or effectively. Many people believe that groups are more effective than individuals in performing tasks because groups have many members. They will also have more resources and thus more ability to efficiently perform tasks and make good decisions. Objective of this session is to explain factors that influence group performance, to study Sajong's drive theory of social facilitation, to elaborate about group decision making and explain its advantages and disadvantages. To understand the process of decision making along with its downside, and finally to study the techniques to improve the group decision making. There are several factors that can influence group performance. Some of the variables that can influence group performance are discussed below. Social facilitation. In one of the earliest social psychological studies, Norman Triplett in 1898 investigated how bicycle racers were influenced by the social situation in which they raced. Triplett found something very interesting. The racers who were competing with other cyclists on the same track rode significantly faster than those who were racing alone against the clock. This led Triplett to hypothesize that people perform tasks better when the social context includes other people than when they do the task alone. The tendency to perform tasks better or faster in the presence of others is known as social facilitation. Social inhibition. Although people sometimes perform better when they are in groups than they do alone, the situation is not that simple. Perhaps you can remember a time when you found that a task you could perform well alone. For example, giving a presentation, playing a video game, shooting a basketball free throw, or making a soccer penalty kick was not performed as well when you tried it with or in front of others. Thus, it seems that the conclusion that being with others increases performance cannot be entirely true, and that sometimes the presence of others can worsen our performance. The tendency to perform tasks more poorly or slower in the presence of others is known as social inhibition. So, as the presence of others can both improve and worsen the individual performance, it is important to explore the different conditions that promote these opposite outcomes. Sajong's drive theory of social facilitation. Sajong argued that when we with others, we experience more arousal than we do when we are alone, and this arousal increases the likelihood that we will perform the dominant response. The dominant response is nothing but the action that we are most likely to emit in any given situation. According to the social facilitation model of Robert Sajong, the mere presence of others produces arousal, which increases the probability that the dominant response will occur. If dominant response is correct, the task is performed better, whereas if dominant response is incorrect, the task is performed more poorly. The important aspect of Sajong's theory was that the experience of arousal and the resulting increasing in the performance of the dominant response could be used to predict whether the presence of others would produce social facilitation or social inhibition. Sajong argued that if the task to be performed was relatively easy, or if the individual had learned to perform the task very well, for example, a task such as pedaling a bicycle or tying one's shoe, the dominant response was likely to be correct response, and the increase in arousal caused by the presence of others would improve performance. On the other hand, if the task was difficult or not well learned, for example, solving a complex problem, giving a speech in front of others, tying a lab apron behind one's back, the dominant response was likely to be incorrect one, and because the increase in arousal would increase the occurrence of the incorrect or dominant response, performance would be hindered. One interesting aspect of Sejong's theory is that because it only requires the concept of arousal and dominant response to explain task performance, it predicts that the effect of others on the performance will not necessarily be confined to humans. Sejong reviewed evidence that dogs ran faster, chickens ate more feed, ants built bigger nests, and rats had more sex when other dogs, chickens, ants and rats respectively were around. In fact, in one of the most unusual of all social psychology experiments, Sejong, Hengartner and Herman found that cockroaches ran faster on straight runways when other cockroaches were observing them from behind a plastic window, but that they ran slower in the presence of other roaches on the maze that involved making a difficult turn, presumably because running straight was the dominant response, whereas turning was not. Although the arousal model proposed by Sejong is perhaps the most elegant, other explanations have also been proposed to account for social facilitation and social inhibition. One modification argues that we are particularly influenced by others when we perceive that the others are evaluating us or competing with us. This makes sense because in these cases, another important motivator of human behavior, the desire to enhance the self, is involved in addition to arousal. In one study supporting this idea, Stroop and his colleagues found that the presence of spectators increased the speed of joggers only when the spectators were facing the joggers and thus could see them and access their performance. The presence of others who expect us to do well and who are thus likely to be particularly distracting has been found to have important consequence in some real world situations. For example, Baumeister and Steinhilber found that professional athletes frequently performed more poorly than would be expected in crucial games that were played in front of their own fans. Process losses and process gains. So far in this section, we have been focusing on how being in a group affects individual performance. What about the broader question of whether performance is enhanced when people work in groups compared with what group members would have achieved if they had been working on their own? Working in groups clearly has some benefits because groups consist of many members. Group performance is almost always better than the performance of an individual acting alone. Many heads are better than one in terms of knowledge, collective memory, physical strength and other abilities. The group from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration that worked together to land a human on the moon, a music band whose members are writing a new song together, or a surgical team in the middle of a complex operation may coordinate their efforts so well that it is clear that the same outcome could never have occurred if the individuals had worked alone or in another group of less well suited individuals. In these cases, the knowledge and the skills of the individuals seem to work together to be effective, and the outcome of the group appears to be enhanced. When groups work better than we would expect given the individuals who form them, we call the outcome a process gain. On the other hand, there are also costs to working in groups. Sometimes being in a group can stifle creativity and increase procrastination. In these cases, the groups experience process losses. A process loss occurs when they perform more poorly than we would expect given the characteristics of the members of the group. Process losses in groups occur in part simply because it is difficult for the people to work together. The maximum group performance can only occur if all participants put forth their greatest effort at exactly the same time. Since despite the best effort of the group, it is difficult to perfectly coordinate the input of the group members, the likely result is a process loss such that the group performance is less than would be expected as calculated as the sum of the individual inputs. Thus, actually productivity in the group is reduced in part by these coordination losses. Coordination losses become more problematic as the size of the group increases because it becomes correspondingly more difficult to coordinate the group members. Kelly, Conroy, Dalhay and Hill put individuals into separate booths and threatened them with electrical shock. Each person could avoid the shock, however, by pressing a button in the booth for 3 seconds. But the situation was arranged so that only one person in the group could press the button at one time, and therefore the group members needed to coordinate their actions. Kelly and his colleagues found that the larger groups had significantly more difficulty in coordinating their actions to escape their shocks than did the smaller groups. A group process loss that occurs when people do not work as hard in a group as they do when they are alone is known as social loafing. The next topic is decision making. Decision making basically involves choosing a course action after carefully considering it. It requires decision makers to evaluate all alternatives at their disposal and select one. Each step of the management process include decision making. Firstly, planners have to choose one plan from an array of alternatives after evaluating them individually. Secondly, managers have to constantly take small decisions to implement their plans. Next, they have to take more decisions while evaluating the success of these plans. Other processes like budgeting also require decisions. Involvement of groups. It is always relatively simple to take decisions when only one person has to do it. This is because this person does not need to consult with others for his decisions. This way, he can take decisions quickly. This also enables fixation of accountability on the decision maker. One single person is responsible for decisions this way. A sole proprietorship form of business is a great example of this, that however rarely happens in larger business organizations. For example, consider partnership firms or companies. Decision making by groups is very common in these business structures. Since partners of a firm are jointly and severally liable for their activities, they often take decisions together. Similarly, decision of the board of directors of the companies also involve many people. Even managers and employees of the companies often make decisions collectively. Departmental activities are also good example of this. Decision making by groups. The way in which groups of people make decision is different from individual doing the same. Whenever a group of people makes decisions, accountability rests on all of them collectively. Furthermore, the involvement of many people also makes the process more comprehensive. It is always up to the senior level managers like directors to decide when groups will make decision. All organizations generally have a policy in place for such matters. For example, a company may have a policy stating that only the board of directors can anonymously take decisions regarding the hiring of senior managers instead of allowing a single director to do so. This policy should lay down the exact scope of the group's authority to make decisions. Unfettered and unbridled powers can lead to exploitations. Decisions made this way may be arbitrary and impractical. Furthermore, the policy must clearly define which exact persons will make decisions collectively. People without authority must never make decisions. Advantages of group decisions. Decision making by groups can offer many advantages and benefits. Firstly, the involvement of more people ensures that the decision is evaluated thoroughly. This is because many people offer their viewpoints and opinions. This further ensures that the decision will be good and practical. Secondly, it becomes easier to implement decisions made this way. Departments and managers can coordinate with each other fluently and achieve their targets. Finally, group decisions create a sense of unity of the purpose amongst the members of an organization. Since they make decisions collectively, they feel motivated to see them through together. Disadvantages of group decisions. One drawback of group decisions is that they require a lot of time. More than one person has to be consulted in such cases. Sometimes formalities like meetings and voting may also become necessary in group decisions. Hence, prompt decisions may not be possible under groups. Indecision is also a big problem under groups. Each person may have her own point of view and unanimity may become difficult to achieve. Members may evade accountability and blame others if their decisions lead to failure. The decision making process. Decision making process involved combining and integrating available informations to choose one out of several possible courses of action. We might think that humans come together to make decisions because group would make better decisions than individuals. Two heads are better than one. Truly important decisions are rarely left to individuals. Instead, they are usually assigned to groups, preferably highly qualified groups. For instance, medical decisions are made by teams of physicians and government policies are set or at least recommended by group of experts. Why are so many crucial decisions entrusted to groups? One answer involves the widespread belief that groups are far less likely than individuals to make risky and hazardous decisions. Is the common sense correct in this respect? Research findings offer a straightforward answer. Not really. Contrary to the popular belief, a large body of evidence indicates that groups are actually more likely to adopt extreme positions than are individuals making decisions alone. In fact, across many different kinds of decisions and many different contexts, groups show a pronounced tendency to shift toward views more extreme than the ones with which they initially began. This is known as group polarization. Group polarization, the tendency of the group members to shift toward a more extreme position than initially held by those individuals as a result of group discussion. A large body of evidence indicates that groups are actually more likely to adopt extreme positions than if its members made those same decisions alone. Major effects of group polarization can be summarized as follows. Whatever the initial leaning or performance of a group prior to its discussions, this preference is strengthened during the group's deliberations. As a result, not only does the group shifts towards more extreme views, individual members too often show such shift. Initial research on this topic suggested that groups move towards the riskier and the riskier alternatives as they discuss important issues. This change described as the risky shift. But additional research indicated that the shift was not always one toward risk. The shift could be in exact opposite direction, that is towards increased caution. Groups tend to move toward increasingly extreme views and the decisions because of two major factors. One, social comparison plays a role. If all of us want to be above average where opinions are concerned, this implies holding views that are better than other group members. Being better would mean holding views that are better than those of other group members. A second factor involves the fact that during group discussion, most arguments favor the group's initial preference. As a result of hearing such arguments, persuasion occurs and the group members shift increasingly towards the majority's view. Downside of group decision making. The drift of many decision making groups toward polarization is a serious problem, one that can interfere with their ability to make a curability decision. But this is not the only process that can exert negative effect on group discussion. Several other factors too can emerge during the discussions and can lead groups to make costly, even disastrous decisions. Among these several factors, these are most important. The first is to groupthink, and second, biased processing of the information in groups, and the third is the failure to share information unique to each member. Groupthink, the tendency of the group members of highly cohesive groups to assume that group decisions can't be wrong. Research indicates that once groupthink develops, groups become unwilling to change their decisions even when initial outcomes suggest that those decisions were very poor ones. According to Janis, the social psychologist who originated the concept of groupthink, said that it encourages an unwillingness among the members of cohesive groups to consider alternative courses of action. Research findings suggest that groupthink occurs because of two crucial factors: a very high level of cohesiveness among group members and the fact that supportive group members in the leader's inner circle exert a disproportional impact on the ultimate decision making. And the second thing is emergent group norms suggesting that the groups is infallible and morally superior, and because of these factors there should be no further discussion of the issues at hand. The decision has been made and the only valid response is to support it as strongly as possible. biased processing of group information. Groups, like individuals, are not always motivated to maximize accuracy. On the contrary, they are often motivated to find support for the views they initially favor. This tendency does not stem from selfish pursuit of self-interest. Rather, they may derive from adherence to values or principles that are generally accepted in society and viewed in a positive light. Groups process the available information in ways that allow them to reach the decisions they want. Third, the failure to share information unique to each member. Group does not always pool their resources, share information and idea unique to each member. When group discuss a given issue and they try to reach a decision about it, they tend to discuss information shared by most, if not all members, rather than information that is known to only one or a few. The result, the decisions they make tend to reflect the shared information. Improving group decisions. Group decision making can be improved in several ways, such as the devil's advocate technique and building authentic dissent. A devil's advocate technique, a technique for improving the quality of group decisions in which one group member is assigned the task of disagreeing with and criticizing whatever plan or decision is under consideration. Authentic dissent, a technique for improving the quality of group decisions in which one or more group members actively disagree with the group's initial preference without being assigned this role. These both tactics often works because it induces members to think carefully about the decision towards which the groups are moving. Conclusion. To conclude, group diversity may produce either process losses or process gains, but it is difficult to predict which will occur in any given group. Nevertheless, depending on the type and the extent of the diversities in a group, the nature of the task and on the skill of the group leaders and the group members to embrace diversity as a strength. It can often promote greater tolerance and result in a range of positive performance and decision making outcomes. Thank you.